You know that feeling at the end of a long night at the office? That silence that settles in when everyone else has gone home, and it's just you and the low hum of the server room. For me, that quiet used to be peaceful. It was the sound of a day's work done. I found comfort in the routine, pack my bag, turn off my desk lamp, and take the same old elevator down 20 floors to the ground. I must have done it 1,000 times. But on that night, the routine broke. And I learned that some elevators don't just take you where you want to go. They take you where you belong. The company I work for is in one of those soulless, modern glass towers that tries to look impressive, but is really just a cage of escalating ambition. My cubicle was on the 20th floor, a sterile little box of gray partitions and ergonomic chairs that promised comfort, but only delivered a deeper kind of fatigue. My job was, well, it's a job. Numbers on a screen, emails that all start with just circling back, and the quiet desperation of watching the clock tick toward 5. Or in my case, toward 9. I was usually the last one to leave. Not out of dedication, but because the silence of the office felt less lonely than the silence of my apartment. That night was no different. The floor was a ghost town. The motion-activated lights in the hallways would flicker on ahead of me and snap off behind me, which made me feel like the only living thing in a dead world. The only other sound was the whisper of the air conditioning and the distant, electronic heartbeat of the server room behind its locked door. The routine was as ingrained as breathing. I tidied my desk, stacking papers I knew I wouldn't look at until the morning. I powered down my monitor and watched my reflection dissolve into the black screen, a pale, tired face I barely recognized. I grabbed my coat and bag, the fabric rustling way too loudly in the immense quiet. Walking to the elevator bank felt like the final walk to the gallows. The polished marble floors reflected the harsh fluorescent lights from above, making the long corridor seem sterile and infinite. There were 4 elevators, 4 sets of gleaming silver doors. I pressed the down button. The plastic circle lit up with a soft, obedient red glow, and I waited, listening to the faint whir of cables inside the walls. It was the sound of escape, the sound of going home. It was a sound I trusted. At least, that's what I thought. The elevator arrived with a gentle ding, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. I stepped inside. The interior was the same as always, mirrored walls, a chrome handrail, and that faint, clean smell of industrial cleaning products. I pressed the button for the ground floor, G. It lit up, confirming my choice. The door slid shut, sealing me inside the small, mirrored box. The descent started normally. That slight lurch in my stomach as gravity took over, the soft hum of the machinery like a familiar lullaby. I watched the floor numbers change on the digital display above the door, counting down my escape. 20, 19, 18. It happened somewhere between the 15th and 14th floors. A violent, shuddering jolt threw me hard against the wall. The hum of the motor changed to a deep, guttural groan, like tearing metal. The lights flickered wildly, strobing the mirrored walls and casting a dozen frantic, distorted versions of me across the tiny space. Then, with a final, sickening buzz, they went out. Total darkness. Total silence. The emergency brake hadn't kicked in. There wasn't that awful screeching sound. The car was just stopped, hanging in the void of the shaft. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with a sudden rush of adrenaline. Before I could even switch on the flashlight, the lights flickered back on, but they were different. Dimmer, a sick, yellow color. I looked up at the floor display. It wasn't showing a number. The red digital screen was just blank. I jammed the door open button. Nothing. I hammered the alarm bell, pushing it over and over. Not a sound. It was dead. Every button was completely dead. I was about to start screaming for help when a soft ding echoed through the car. It was the sound the elevator always made when it arrived. The blank display above the door suddenly lit up, but it didn't show 14 or 15. It showed the number 13. That wasn't possible. My building, like a lot of them, is superstitious. It skips the 13th floor. The plans go straight from 12 to 14. This floor didn't exist. Then, the doors started to slide open. I instinctively threw myself against the back wall of the elevator, my mind scrambling for any rational explanation. A power surge, a system glitch, some cruel, elaborate prank. But my eyes were glued to the widening gap between the doors, and all rationality just evaporated. I expected to see an unfinished service level, bare concrete, exposed wiring, the guts of the building. What I saw instead made no sense at all. It was a hallway, a short, narrow hallway that ended at a single, plain white door. The walls were covered in this faded floral wallpaper, a pattern of pale yellow roses that I vaguely recognized. The floor was a thick, worn, avocado green shag carpet. To my left, against the wall, was a small wooden end table with a rotary phone on it, its coiled cord a dusty mess. The air didn't smell like an office building. It smelled of old paper, my mother's pot roast, and that faint, cloying scent of potpourri. It was impossible. It was completely, terrifyingly impossible. This wasn't a floor in my office building. This was the upstairs hallway of the house I grew up in. Every detail was perfect, but so wrong. It was a memory brought to life, but it was a dead memory. The light came from a single, bare bulb overhead that cast a jaundiced, sickly glow and seemed to suck the air right out of the space. The silence was absolute, a heavy, pressing weight that felt so much deeper than the emptiness of the office. This wasn't quiet, it was a total void of sound. I stood frozen in the elevator, my hand gripping the cold chrome rail. Part of me screamed to just jam the door close button, to ride this metal coffin anywhere but here. But my feet felt like they were bolted to the floor. A horrible, magnetic pull was coming from that hallway. It felt familiar. It felt like home. My eyes were drawn to the white door at the end of the hall. I knew that door. I knew the tiny chip in the paint right near the brass doorknob. I knew the exact way it would creak on its hinges. Behind that door was the living room where I'd spent thousands of hours of my childhood. I don't know how long I stood there, caught between the impossible scene in front of me and the safety of the elevator behind me. The elevator doors just stayed open, patiently, waiting for me to choose. I took a step. My leatherwork shoes sank into the shag carpet, and the fibers clung to it like desperate little fingers. The air was thick, still, and freezing cold. I left the elevator, and the door stayed open behind me, a silver frame around an exit I wasn't sure I could ever use again. Walking down that short hall felt like wading through mud. Each step took a huge effort. My mind was just a screaming chaos of denial, but my body moved with a strange, dreamlike purpose. I passed the rotary phone, its plastic shell gleaming dully. I remembered my father yelling into that phone. I remembered my sister crying next to it. The memories weren't just pictures, they were feelings, hanging in the air like dust. I reached the door. My hand was trembling as I reached for the knob. It was cold, just like I remembered, but this cold felt deeper, like a chill that went straight to the bone. I turned it. There was no click, just a smooth, silent turn. I pushed the door open. The living room was there, exactly as it was when I was 10 years old. The lumpy brown corduroy sofa, the heavy wood-paneled TV set, the family photos arranged on the mantelpiece above a fireplace we never used. The same ugly landscape painting hung crookedly on the wall. It was a perfect, horrifying diorama of my past. But it wasn't empty. Sitting on the sofa, with his back to me, was a small boy. He was wearing pajamas I hadn't thought about in 30 years, blue ones, with little red rocket ships on them. He was sitting perfectly still, his small shoulders hunched, just staring at the television. The screen was on, but it was only playing static, a swirling vortex of black and white snow. The hissing sound it made was the only noise in the universe. I knew who it was. It was me. A tidal wave of pure wrongness crashed over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to him, to grab him, to tell him what? To warn him about the life he had ahead of him? To apologize? My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My throat was clamped shut. Then, from the corner of the room to my left, I heard a sound. A soft, dry whisper. It was my name. That whisper shattered the paralysis. Pure, animal panic just exploded in my chest. I didn't turn to see what spoke my name. I couldn't. I stumbled backward, my feet tangling in that deep carpet. I spun around and just ran, the single bulb in the hallway swinging wildly, casting these lurching, monstrous shadows. The elevator was still there. Its silver doors were a gateway back to sanity. I scrambled inside, my hands slapping against the control panel, searching for the button, any button. My fingers found the G, and I just jammed it with all my strength, again and again. With a groan, the doors began to slide shut. For a split second, I saw the hallway one last time. The faded wallpaper, the rotary phone, the awful yellow light. It looked like a museum exhibit, an exhibit of my life. The doors closed, and the world went blessedly, beautifully silver. The elevator shuddered once, a violent spasm, and then began to go down. The hum of the machinery was normal now. The light was bright and white. I looked at the floor display. 12, 11, 10. It was working. It was real. When it finally dinged on the ground floor, I practically fell out into the lobby. The security guard at the front desk looked up from his magazine and gave me a lazy nod. Everything was normal. The cool night air outside, the distant sound of traffic, the sterile marble floor under my feet. It was all real. I ran out of the building and didn't look back. I took a cab home, not daring to set foot on the subway. I got to my apartment and locked the door, leaning against it, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I've taken the stairs at work every single day since. All 20 floors, up and down. People ask me why. I just tell them it's for my health. How could I ever explain that I'm afraid of where the elevator might take me? How do I tell them I'm terrified it might take me back? But the worst part isn't the memory. It's what came back with me. Sometimes, when my apartment is completely quiet, I can hear a faint, dry whisper coming from the other room. And last night, when I got out of the shower and looked in the steamed-up mirror, I saw something. For just a second, before it vanished. Reflected in the glass, standing right behind me, was a small boy in rocket ship pajamas. He was just watching me. The elevator took me to the ground floor that night, but I don't think I ever really made it home. Have you ever experienced something in a familiar place that you just can't explain? A moment where reality just seemed to bend a little? Share your story in the comments. And if you want more accounts from the borderlands of our world, make sure to subscribe. You're not alone in the dark.